So, Golden Globes are behind us, which means it's Oscars season. And along with that means it's just like Oscars campaigning season, which is the act of giving tons of interviews and promoting your movie that's been out for months and months and months, which was actually invented by Harvey Weinstein back in the day. I think the early 2000s is when he started doing that, doing lots of interviews and actively putting up billboards and things like that. Anyway, so right now the front runner for Best Picture is obviously Oppenheimer. And along with that, Chris Nolan's likely to get his first Oscar as a director, and he's given lots of interviews. But one of those interviews, he said something kind of interesting that I wanted to talk about. Oppenheimer making nearly $1 billion means that a post-franchise movie era is possible. He said, quote, "I think the film's success certainly points to a sort of post-franchise, post-IP landscape for movies. It's kind of encouraging. It reminds the studios that there's an appetite for something people haven't seen before, or an approach to things that people haven't seen before. Something like Oppenheimer working gives our filmmakers a point of reference for how something can work in the marketplace that the studio can relate to." Now, of course, anytime somebody talks about post-franchise, post-IP, what they mean is superheroes. And what they mean specifically with superheroes is Marvel. And I think that's because a lot of people who consider themselves like cinephiles and like true filmmaker types in the 1970s sense of the word, like Scorsese and, Chris Nolan, will blame Marvel for the downfall of cinema. And of course, it's rich coming from somebody who directed a Batman movie, the best Batman movie. However, I think what he's failing to realize here is that Oppenheimer is a franchise IP that people understand already. So with this, I want to talk about something called a pre-sold franchise, which just means that it's a concept that people are already sold on. So like a lot of adaptations will fall into that category. Like it's a Marvel movie, so it's based on comics, it's based on characters people already know. There's already a base level of interest going into it. The same thing goes for book adaptations. Like even Dune falls in that category because it's something that you might not know Dune, the story specifically, but you know that it exists. You know it's in the zeitgeist. You're aware of it, and there's some base level of interest for people who know the book or are interested in science fiction to a certain extent, and that's a very popular piece of literature. So what I would say with this, and I think the irony of what Chris Nolan is saying here, is Oppenheimer is a pre-sold franchise too, because it is in a way an adaptation. It's historical. Anything that is based on a piece of history that basically everybody knows, whether it's a lesser told story, or it's being shown in a new way, or it's being presented to people in new information that people didn't know about, specifically like a lot of in this. It's just a matter of people do know about the atomic bomb. People knew about Los Alamos. People knew about Oppenheimer. He's a very, very famous figure in history. Everyone's aware of the bomb, and it's taught in school. It is something that a lot of people know. It is a pre-sold franchise. It is something that most people have a base level knowledge or interest in. He's talking about this in terms of, it's something you take a chance on because it's not a big IP, not a big franchise. But realistically, this was going to be a big movie. And it was, when you think like, when people take a risk on a movie, it's like, oh, who would have known that this was going to be popular? It's like, well, Chris Nolan, the producers, the distributor Universal, it's like they all pretty much knew this was going to be successful because of, what it is and the baseline knowledge that everyone has about that piece of history. Historical dramas do very well, in addition to it being Oscar bait. So the point of all this is to say, people like to say the post-franchise, post-IP landscape in film. They say they want that. But realistically, you can't say that while also pushing historical dramas. It's the same damn thing. And while I do think that there is a chance for movies that are not pre-sold franchises, that are not based on IP existing, it is definitely not going to get the kind of money that Oppenheimer did. I think when you put the name Chris Nolan together with Nuclear Explosion, you're going to be able to make a certain amount of money back and get a certain number of Oscar nominations. And so that's what made it a safe bet, and it's what makes people willing to give him the kind of money that he gets for movies. Because he's batting almost 100. He's doing really, really great with all of his movies. I think Tenet's the only thing that was sort of a flop, and you could blame that on a lot of other landscape circumstances other than what the actual film was. So all I want to leave you with is I don't think he's right that Oppenheimer's success indicates that there's hope for original films. It is still as dismal as it was before. However, I think you have to also couple this with the fact that Chris Nolan, in addition to wanting to keep a fresh IP movies alive, he also is trying to save the theatrical experience. And I think realistically, if you want those medium-sized stories that are going to be, original, and you want them to find a home, it's going to be on streaming services. It's not going to be in theaters necessarily. And it makes me think back to in 2012, 2013, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas gave a talk at UCLA, I think it was, where they talked about the future of cinema being spectacles. People talk about Marvel movies and everything being like roller coasters, and that's exactly what they predicted. And this was back when, I think it was right after the first Avengers movie came out. So that was huge, but I don't think we knew where it was going, how much bigger it was going to get. And they had suspected it was going to be like going to see a play. It was like going to see Les Mis or seeing Chicago or something. It's going to be a big, expensive night out kind of thing. And realistically, that's what the movies sort of used to be a long, long time ago. So you could look at it as being cyclical, but it makes sense. And I think Oppenheimer definitely falls into that category of this giant spectacle movie. This isn't some weird little $10 million, new IP movie. Like, even the only reason he was able to get the kind of money he did for Inception was because he had just made $1 billion for Warner Brothers with The Dark Knight. And then they basically said, whatever you want to do, go. You have carte blanche, do whatever you want, make whatever, any kind of movie you want. And he said, okay, great. I'm going to make this weird thing I've had sitting in a drawer that would never, ever have this kind of budget otherwise. And I think that set a stage for maybe original spectacle films, but there's still going to be a case of, like, Oppenheimer was big because it's based on history. It's just like any other World War II movie that would be very expensive, be Oscar bait. It ends up doing very well, very, very typically. All that being said, I'm still very much hoping that Oppenheimer wins. I didn't like the third act, but I liked it overall, and I'm glad that Robert Downey Jr. is going to get something. Anyways, I'm probably going to end up throwing some kind of like live Oscar party here, by the way. I'm in my new place. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to be doing more coverage and stuff. Maybe we'll do some lives from outside events and stuff. Okay. Bye.